When does fantasy become delusion? This is a question that is not asked nearly as much as it should be. In the year of our Lord 2024, we have seen many examples of fantasy crossing over into delusion, Chris Chan being the best example of this point. Now, fantasy is a healthy part of many people's lives. I myself indulge in entertaining my own fantasy worlds in times of boredom. Sometimes I'm flying through the sky, slashing titans with Eren in AOT. Sometimes I'm leading the war against the Lannisters in A Song of Ice and Fire. Sometimes I'm helping Ainz take over the world in Overlord. All this is harmless, as I can separate these fantasies from reality. But what of those who can't? What of those who allow their fantasies to cross that fine line into delusion? Well, you have the song we are here to discuss today. Sung by Yuki, with music by Crusher. You have the Rugrats Theory. Now once again we have a song with an adjoining creepypasta, one that I will be reading before discussing the song, due to its brevity and the story being written in such a way that it works better as a synopsis, rather than a fully realised story. I will put a timestamp for the analysis part of the video if you wish to skip the reading, as there will be slurs towards disabled people and language others may find offensive. Now with all that being said, it's time to put the babies to sleep, because this is the Rugrats Theory. The Rugrats were really just a figment of Angelica's imagination. Chucky died in 1986 along with his mother. That's why Chaz is a nervous wreck all the time. Tommy was born in 1988, but he was a stillborn. That's why Stu is constantly in the basement, making toys for the son who never had a chance to live. The DeVilles had an abortion in 1990. Angelica couldn't figure out whether the child would have been a boy or a girl, thus creating the twins. As for All Grown Up, the teenage Angelica became addicted to various narcotics, which further exacerbated her schizophrenia. This brought her back to her childhood creation she had obsessed over, but because of the time that had passed between the present and the last time she had interacted with her delusions, she made them older. Angelica was constantly taking hits of acid so that she would never have to live without them. They were the only company she had in a judgmental world. Angelica's mum actually died of a heroin overdose in 1982, just after Angelica was born. Drew, in his depression, married a gold-digging whore. He had lost his mind after the death of his wife and was in denial that she was ever a prostitute. Angelica idolized her because she fooled herself into thinking she was her real mother, but she always had a concept of her real mum. Cynthia, the Barbie doll she was so attached to, was fashioned in the woman's image, with an unwashed orange dress and jacked up hair. Later in life, she followed in her mother's footsteps, dying of an overdose at age 13 when All Grown Up was cancelled. The only Rugrat not to be fictional was unborn Tommy's brother, Dill. However, Angelica didn't know the difference between Dill and her creations, although Dill didn't follow her commands. After endless crying and a refusal to disappear like the others did when Angelica was angry of them, she hit him. Due to this, he sustained a brain hemorrhage, which resulted in deformation. As he grew up, his damage only became more evident, and by the time he was 9 and all grown up, he lived as an outcast, ridiculed for his weirdness and retardation. The immense guilt over this is what led Angelica to her drug use and to uncreate the Rugrats briefly until her experience with hallucinogenics. On a trip to Paris to find love, Chaz married a woman named Kira. He was actually going to marry a different woman named Coco, but she just wanted him for his money. Kira had a daughter named Kimmy that was torn from her because she was a cocaine addict. Angelica imagined her from Kira's stories. Upon returning to America, Chaz and Kira got engaged, and she got her green card. It was actually a very happy and romantic story. Kira constantly struggled with addiction, but was relatively happy with her life and with Chaz. Susie was actually Angelica's only friend. She entertained the thoughts of Angelica's creations for the girl's sake. She later became a psychologist and teamed up with Nickelodeon to make the Rugrats. When Angelica died of her overdose, Susie helped her arrange her funeral. Angelica spent the last days of her life in the back of the school cafeteria, imagining her friends all around her, playing with the lives of her creations. The song starts with an image of Angelica holding her throat against a pure black background. We never see her face. All we see is her staring off into the sky, seemingly entranced by something. Already as the song begins, there is much to explore. Angelica, as seen in this video, has a body much older than how she's depicted in the original Rugrats television show, looking more like a girl in her early teens, much like how she's shown in Rugrats All Grown Up. Although here, she's still wearing the same clothes she wore in the original show. This is a clever way of depicting her stunted mental state before the song truly begins. Wearing clothes for a 3-year-old while being a teenager. Moving on to the lyrics themselves. Angelica says how the world is so beautiful, and goes on to question why someone is hurting themselves. Now the question is Angelica talking to herself, someone we don't see, or to us the listener? In my mind, it is none of these. As we will see later on in the song, she may well be talking to the doll, Cynthia, which, if you'd remember from the Creepypasta, Cynthia is the physical manifestation of Angelica's mother, as her disheveled appearance shows her addiction to heroin. Cynthia here could be seen as many things, but I believe there is only one way to truly interpret her place in the song: the embodiment of Angelica's delusion and her addiction. Having a doll that resembles her drug-addicted mother, while also being something that connects her so deeply to childhood. Well, what better metaphor could you possibly ask for within this song? It may even be a metaphor for the song itself, a thin layer of innocence over a bog of sin and pain. The next verse of the song is more simple, as the first 2 lines consist of Angelica simply pondering the meaning behind all this. The last 2 lines, however, well, they are definitely worth our time. They state, "Everything I've been told, I believe, yet the people that I love just leave." This may be Angelica's response to receiving treatment for her delusions. Maybe her mention of believing people is referring to her receiving medication or going to therapy to overcome her illness. But losing the people she loves, her friends, her delusions. Food for thought. The following verse depicts Angelica accepting the advice of some figure whose nature is unknown to us. Well, that is until the next line, right, Cynthia? Angelica here is talking to her doll, the manifestation of her delusion and addiction. Her saying she'll push away any doubt shows her falling deeper into her delusions and denying any possibility of facing reality. The next verse exemplifies this point even further, as this is when we hear mention of Tommy, Chucky, Phil, and Lil, with her stating she'll never be alone. Angelica, heeding the words of Cynthia, is following the path of her mother, losing herself to drugs and delusion. She finds comfort, peace in the drugs and the delusions that they bring to reality, causing her to keep spinning deeper down into the rabbit hole. But here is when we see what happens when delusions are unchecked in this verse. For here, Angelica expresses her wish that everything be kept the same, The reason why this is important is that in the creepypasta, baby Dill is real. The fly in the ointment, a flaw in Angelica's perfect world. So if you remember from the story, Angelica hits Dill in the head, causing a hemorrhage resulting in his mental disability. The verse after this is merely her frustration that they, most likely Dill, will not listen to her. Once again, an example of the dangers of delusion. When the world does not comply with her fantasies, Angelica lashes out, with baby Dill paying the price. In the creepypasta, from which the song takes its influence, the guilt from striking Dill caused Angelica to fall deeper down into her addiction later on in All Grown Up. The knowledge that she had caused a baby to suffer head trauma that still affects him to this day, well, it drove her deeper and deeper into her fantasies. The story also states that the continued drug use worsened her schizophrenia, which could explain the intense paranoia she shows in the next verse. Here, the lyrics show her falling deeper into her fantasy world, but maybe also for some kind of persecutory delusion, which is very closely associated with schizophrenia. In the next verse, Angelica talks about how people see her as blind, after which she admits to having ignored something important. Perhaps the blindness is her being unable to see past her delusions. She continues to say how it's too late to do that now. When taking the other lines from this verse into account, it may show that she is talking to someone who's trying to help her. Every line in this verse feels like a response to someone. Perhaps Angelica did look for help for her delusions. As previously mentioned though, the verse ends with, "I guess it's too late to do that now," showing that she knows her perception of reality may be too far gone. The theme that permeates the next verse is one of utter loss. She begins asking where did everyone go? Perhaps she's referring to her support network, or she may be talking about her delusions. Either way, she mentions a need to repeat, maybe showing it's not only her guilt over what she did to Dill that drove her deeper into drugs, but the desire to live in a world where she didn't hurt him in the first place and can live free from said guilt. The next verse is a simple two-line verse. Who am I again, a princess or a psychopath? Angelica is slowly losing any sense of self as seen here. Her drug use and delusions are causing her to lose the perception she has of herself. Or at least that's the way I see it. I believe this question shows the struggle in her head. On the one hand, she's a princess, the perfect little girl as we see in the original cartoon. On the other hand, she's a psychopath in her own eyes. Someone who would strike a baby and left him permanently mentally impaired. After this short verse, Angelica is now in more distress than ever. She sings of a paradise slowly crumbling away, now that she has opened her eyes. Maybe in the end she did try to stop. Maybe she put down the drugs and tried to move on from her fantasies, but seeing her friends die, in her mind, the only people who truly ever loved her, made her fall back into her paradise. And in the next verse, we see the consequences. Here, Angelica is at her lowest. She wonders if things just might be better if she had never lived at all. Probably thinking back to Dill in this instance. We also see the world dying, repeated 6 times in one line. In the story, Angelica died of an overdose, but we never know if it was an accident or if it was intentional. Well, in the second to last verse of the song, I believe we get our answer. To quote, I could just rewind it. Backwards, 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 backwards. Angelica has lost the battle to addiction, to guilt, to delusion, to the demons she inherited from her mother. And in losing the battle, she has lost her life. The last verse is simply one phrase, repeated 5 times. Now my world is perfect, over and over. Maybe, hopefully, in her last moments, Angelica, the Rugrat, found peace. This song, in my mind, is brilliant. Crusher did an amazing job on the English lyrics. Better than the original Creepypasta, if you ask me, when it comes to telling an interesting story. Angelica in this song is an interesting character. We see her at the start, a child playing make-believe, lost in an imaginary world, but when forced to face reality with Dill, she lashes out to terrible effect. A consequence of imperfection in a perfect world. Now, speaking of her perfect world, when looking through fan art of the Creepypasta for this song, 2 key phrases always appeared. A princess or a psychopath, and now my world is perfect. We will be looking at the latter line for the video, as it aligns more with my closing remark that I will make at the end. The reason this line is of such interest to the community built around this song, both Creepypasta and Vocaloid, is difficult to determine. For my part, I believe it may be that in the end, we can finally see Angelica happy. False or not, we can only hope that this girl, who had been through so much, can finally have peace in death. Now, here comes my favourite part, where I go off script and just stare off into the mic as opposed to the script I've been reading throughout this entire video. I mentioned just a minute ago that I have a closing remark I would like to make for this video. And here it is. We are living in a world where delusions are becoming more and more common, and quite frankly, it is scary. I mentioned earlier Chris Chan. Now, I'm not going to go too far in depth as this isn't a lolcow channel, but I will say this. Chris Chan is emblematic of a increasingly harmful trend, that being dimension hopping, or whatever you wish to call it. The idea that some people have that in their minds they can go to an alternate reality and live out a separate life. Now, as I stated at the beginning of this song, I myself have fantasies that I delve into when I'm bored. Many times I delve into those fantasies for hours at a time, like when I'm traveling from university to home and listening to music. That's my favorite time, because it's just a time when I can relax and indulge in another more fun world. But the difference is between me and the people who believe in dimension hopping is that I know that they're not real. There is no dimension where I live in the AOT universe. There is no dimension where I lead the Stark army against the Lannisters, or I'm best buddies with Ainz and we take over the world together. That is not real. It's a fantasy that I have when I'm bored to go into and distract myself from the world around me. But that's the difference, isn't it? When you believe that these fantasies are real, when you believe wholeheartedly that they are real, that's when it becomes dangerous. Thank you for watching.